Welcome and thank you for being here for this very important community meeting. I am Mayor Mary Fassbender, Mayor of the City of Hastings. I and Council have made it our #1 priority for safe drinking water in the City of Hastings. Staff has been working diligently for a solution. Hastings' entire water system is compromised, with no other feasible option except treatment to serve 23,000 people. No individual should have to drink water that is below the federal law. We've worked very hard and have done everything we can to this point. We are seeking for financial help. We greatly appreciate the efforts of Senator Judy Seeberger and Representative Shane Hudello for their advocating on our city's behalf. Representative Hudello was not able to be with us tonight, and may I introduce Senator Judy Seeberger.
Thanks for being here, everybody. PFAS is a serious issue. It's something that I'm very concerned about. I live in Afton. We are right in the plume of one of the disposal sites in the East Metro. My own well is contaminated with PFAS, and I live with the big filters. I was fortunate enough to be in a town that was a part of the 3M settlement funds, and I know that Hastings has been excluded, which is not okay with me. At the state level, I'm doing everything I can to get the funding necessary for the water treatment plants that Hastings is ready to build. I will give a lot of credit to the City of Hastings. Mayor Mary, your Public Works, your City Administrator, they have been very proactive in taking the steps necessary to get the water treatment system underway. The issue right now is money. This shouldn't be borne on the backs of the citizens of Hastings. I believe the state should step in and pay money. I believe the MPCA should use some of the money within the settlement funds to pay for this. That is what I'm fighting for right now at the state level. You're going to hear from Kurt Kudelka from the MPCA. He and I had a meeting, I don't even know what day it is today, Thursday. We had a meeting on Tuesday, and I was very dissatisfied with his responses. I believe that he can do more and should do more to provide the funding to Hastings to pay for the water treatment. There is no reason why Hastings should be carved out of those settlement funds. Absolutely no reason. So I am fighting for you. I'm doing everything I can. I'm in communication with Mayor Mary all the time to ensure that we get the funding. I sit right in front of Senator Pappas, who's the chair of the Capital Investments Committee, on the floor, and we're spending a lot of time on the floor now, and I'm turning around every day and I'm saying, hey, Senator Pappas, what are we doing for Hastings? She knows she's getting sick of me, but I'm not going to stop advocating for you folks. Clean water is a necessity. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm a little busy now until May 20th in session. Sometimes they keep us on the floor till 4 or 5 in the morning, but I will get back to you. This is a huge concern of mine. I will do everything I can for you, and I would challenge you to ask Kurt Kudelka what he is doing for the City of Hastings, because I'm asking him those questions too. I'm glad to see everybody here. I will do everything I can to help the City of Hastings get the clean water that you folks deserve. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Dan Waticha. I'm your city administrator. My role tonight really is just to sort of MC and keep things moving along. As a quick logistics type introduction, we will have a series of presentations by the Department of Health, the Pollution Control Agency, and then also our city engineering department. And then we will, at the end, have questions and answers. And I believe that we're committed to staying here to hear questions in person. We will have a couple of runners with microphones, so when we get to that point, raise your hand. We also had note cards as you came in, so if you're more comfortable writing down your question, we can collect those and ask those. And for our viewers who are watching over the YouTube channel, there's also a email address so that they can send questions in to us also. If we happen to run out of time, those ones, because we'll have an email, we could get back to. But do want to hold questions till the end, but we want to certainly make sure that we have room for that. With that, I'm turning this over now to Chris Close from the Department of Health. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting us here tonight, Hastings. I am Chris Close, and I am the supervisor of the Health Risk Assessment Unit at the Department of Health. And I'm going to first tell you a little bit about what we do. So I have a team of scientists, and what we do is we make health-based guidance for drinking water. So health-based guidance is a number, and that number is a health-based value. And what that is it's the concentration of a contaminant in water that is likely to pose little or no health risk to people who drink the water. And we make sure that that number protects the most sensitive populations, so that's usually infants, children, and it also protects the most highly exposed individuals. So that is our whole goal in the Health Risk Assessment Unit. What's important about our numbers is that they are entirely health-based. So we don't look at the cost of implementing them. We don't look at feasibility. We have the luxury of only looking at health, and that makes these numbers pretty special. However, one thing about them is they're not enforceable, and they're not enforceable because they are purely health-based. And now these are different from the EPA's MCLs, or maximum contaminant levels, so you're gonna hear those tonight. Those, health is used to make the numbers, but then they're adjusted. They're adjusted due to cost, they're adjusted for feasibility of implementing those numbers. So there's a difference between those, and those are federal numbers and they're enforceable. So first of all, PFAS, what are they? So PFAS is the family of PFAS chemicals. So the per and polyfluorinated substances, and there are thousands of them. So they were first introduced in the 1940s by 3M and then also DuPont, and we've been exposed our whole lives to PFAS. So in water, in household goods, they were used on so many products, and that's why they're everywhere, and 98% of us have these in our blood. So there's, again, more than 4,000 chemicals. I've seen an upper limit of up to 15,000 chemicals. They're just not identified precisely yet and don't have names. So you can see there, the PFAS, there's the chemical structure. So what makes them super stable is the fluorine atoms on these chemicals. That makes them stable. It makes them stick around in the environment for a long, long time. And so they stick around in us for a long, long time also. They're heat, grease, stain, oil, and water resistant, which is what made them so fabulous when they first started putting these in products, because they work really well. Unfortunately, they also stick around really well, and we did not know about the health effects at that time. So you might wonder why all of a sudden your water systems are not in compliance, right? So PFAS and PFOA are two of the chemicals in the PFAS family, and these are the most well-studied. You can see back in 2002, we first made guidance for PFAS and PFOA. At that time, there were only a couple animal studies that we could put our numbers on and base our numbers on. So as you can see, they are quite high, so 1,000 and 7,000 parts per trillion. But as it became more of a national problem and not just a Minnesota problem, studies became available. Money was invested to do more animal studies, to look at people. And as you can see, as they started narrowing down and looking at a wider range of doses, you can see the numbers dropped. Around 2007, they started looking at thyroid, so more sensitive endpoints, and realizing that infants were susceptible, so the number dropped again. And then here in 2024, these are the human studies, so human epidemiology studies. So up until this point, everything was in animals, but then all of a sudden, human studies became available, and you can see that humans are quite sensitive, and the numbers dropped. And that's why your numbers dropped also. So right now, it's 2.3 parts per trillion for PFAS, and 0.24 parts per trillion per PFOA. And right now, there's also a cancer number for both. Cancer numbers are more murky. The evidence isn't there. It's not as strong as the other health effects. So I just want to put you at ease for that. I'll go to the next slide. So one thing that is pretty consistent is with the animal studies and the human studies, there's some health effects that are appearing. There's a pattern. They're just more sensitive in humans. Humans are more sensitive to them. So one of them is the immune system. So this is particularly true for infants and young children. They have a slower antibody response to challenge. Another one is developmental. There's some developmental effects in children. They're just smaller birth weights. There's changes to cholesterol and lipid patterns in humans. And then there's thyroid changes, so changes in hormone levels in the thyroid. So these are not disease effects. These are kind of what you would call health factors. So these change first, and then you get disease. So I just wanted to point that out. So we're at the point now where we can look at more sensitive effects instead of frank disease. So we're seeing these earlier, and then we could protect for them with lower levels. Again, there's cancer. For PFAS, it is, I want to say it's kidney cancer, and for PFOA, it's liver. But again, one of them is only done in animals, and the other one was just an association, one study in humans. So again, there's evidence, that something's happening, but you need more studies to confirm that. I put the most sensitive populations. There's 3 sensitive populations. The first is the fetus, because the fetus takes on whatever the mother has in her blood system for PFAS. So they have the same concentrations. So the baby born at birth took on the mother's load of PFAS. The second is breastfeeding. So we know that PFAS goes right into the milk and into the infant. So again, we're protecting that sensitive population. And then we have the infants and children, because they're developing and they're growing, so they're more susceptible, and we saw that with the immune studies. So one of the things we can do is we want to know what can we do? So we want to reduce our risk. So when we get PFAS levels down at what's appearing in the water now, the EPA level is 4 parts per trillion, we really, your other exposures are more important. So when you get down to that small of a level, we did a study and found that what's occurring in your blood is from all your other exposures. And I've got a slide there to show you. So it's in your house, right? It's in the products you use. So if you have stain-resistant carpeting, stain-resistant sofas and chairs, you probably have PFAS floating around in your house. If you have sticky notes have PFAS in them. Dental floss is a big one. Dental floss has PFAS in them. Candy wrappers, a big one is microwave popcorn bags. Who knew, right? So you eat that microwave popcorn bag, popcorn, you're getting PFAS into your system. So if you're feeling like you need to do something, reducing these kind of exposures will lower it a lot faster than drinking water. So again, it's in your water, but it's not as high as the exposures that you are around in your house. And one of the good things about Minnesota is that we're proactive. So we have a Mayor's Law coming in 2025, and that's going to reduce your exposures. So it's going to stop the non-essential uses of PFAS in your products. It's going to take multiple years for that to completely get going. But that is going to stop those extra exposures that are raising the PFAS in all of our blood levels, because we all have it. So my unit is available for answering questions from any of you, you have our email address there. We check it daily, and someone will get back to you. I have the lead toxicologists on PFAS and PFAS, and we also have our phone number there. So you can call that line, and someone will get back to you and answer questions. All right, so thank you. I'll pass it on now to Lucas.
I'm a little taller than Chris, so I'm just going to take this off. Yeah, no, that's fine. I'll keep it. All right. All right. First of all, thank you everybody for coming tonight to discuss this really important issue that we have a lot of history working on at the health department. So my name is Lucas Martin. I'm a district engineer with the Minnesota Department of Health, which means I'm one of the field staff that comes around, does inspections on water systems, testing on water systems. My area of work is actually in Ramsey and Washington County. So I cover Washington County, which means I cover Woodbury, Cottage Grove, Oakdale, and those communities that have been dealing with PFAS since we found out about it and found out that it was an issue in the state. So I'm happy to talk to you about this issue, on an issue that we've been dealing with for a long time in Minnesota, and have really been working really hard and proactively to work with these communities and water systems in this area of the state. So the picture up here is actually from the city of Woodbury's treatment plant that was built just a few years ago to remove PFAS from the water. So I come in here, do a lot of testing on it, make sure that it's working, make sure that it continues working, make sure it's removing all the contaminants, which it does a good job of. So this is just an example of where we've been able to work with a community to start implementing some of these solutions. So one of the reasons we're all here tonight is on April 10th, the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, put out their finalized their new regulations for PFAS. And so there's six particular specific PFAS chemicals that are covered by this regulation that are often found in drinking water. The regulation has, and Chris has talked a little bit about it already, these MCLs, maximum contaminant levels. Those take into account many different things other than just health effects. They take into account what we can actually measure in water, cost-benefit analysis, availability and treatability of the chemical, ability to treat it and remove it from the water. So there's many different things that have to be taken into account when the EPA sets these levels. They also set maximum contaminant level goals. Those are similar to the health standards and the health guidance that our state sets for some contaminants. They're strictly based on health effects. In some cases, they can be different than the maximum contaminant levels, and there's usually a good reason for that. And you'll see that on the table when I show the actual values, and I'll explain why that's the case. There's also something with this regulation that's kind of new, and it's called a hazard index. And I'm not going to explain in detail what that is, and I'll tell you why on the next slide. But it is a way, and we do something similar to this in our state. It's a way to account for the fact that these different types of chemicals can have the same health effect, and they often occur together in the water, in the same water sample. And so we take that into account by doing an additive risk assessment, and that's what this hazard index refers to. It's very confusing, and I'm going to explain why I'm not going to talk about it in detail in a second. So there's a bunch of numbers on this table. This is the actual maximum contaminant level values that the EPA put out last month. And we're going to focus primarily for Hastings on the top one, which is the PFOA value, 4 parts per trillion for PFOA. That's the one that's primarily affecting the city of Hastings. So that's what we're going to focus on tonight. There's a bunch of other information on here as well. There is also a 4 part per trillion. And so I'm going to step back a little bit. All of these numbers are shown in parts per trillion. Chris talked a little bit about parts per trillion. You're probably asking yourself, what in the heck is a part per trillion, right? So the easiest way to explain it is it's a unit of volume of contaminant in 1 trillion units of volume of water, okay? And the easy way to think about that or to visualize that is it's 1 drop of water in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So it's a very, very small amount of contaminant that we're talking about, hugely small. It's very difficult to analyze down to this level of contaminant. Fortunately, we're able to do that now. So I wanted to kind of put that in perspective. What the heck is a part per trillion? We're throwing acronyms at you. Hopefully that clears up one of your questions. So we're talking about 4 parts per trillion with PFOA and also the PFOS. Those are the two that we're going to focus primarily on. There's a couple other contaminants here that are included in this regulation. There's PFHXS. We do detect this in some of the wells in Hastings, but at a much lower level than that 10 part per trillion MCL. So it's really not a factor with regards to the city of Hastings and what we're looking at with this regulation. Gen X is something that's been talked about nationally. We do test for Gen X. We've tested for PFAS statewide at this point, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. We have not seen Gen X in the entire state, so we don't expect to see it. This is not something, again, that's a factor at all. PFNA is something that we do detect, but very, very rarely in water, and that's in the entire state of all the sampling we've done. So again, not really a factor. And then the health index, the hazard index, sorry. So this hazard index takes into account the additive effects of the 3 above that are shown above that hazard index, PFHXS, Gen X, and PFNA. And there's 1/4 contaminant that's included in that hazard index that's not listed on here. It doesn't have its own MCL, but it is included in this hazard index. And we do test for that as well. The reason we're not going to focus on that, and I'm not going to tell you more about the calculation or show you the math or tell you how we're actually calculating it, is because the highest value we've seen in Hastings is 0.3, and that's primarily due to those detections of PFHXS, which is included in that. And so it's, again, not a factor. We're primarily focusing on PFOA here. So this regulation has requirements through the Safe Drinking Water Act and requires public water systems to first test for PFAS. Then initial testing through the rule requires that testing be done within 3 years. We've actually already done this, and so that's part of the reason we're here today. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. It also requires ongoing testing. So we're not just going to test for it initially. It requires testing perpetually to make sure that water systems continue to remain in compliance with this rule. It also requires for the public to be informed. So every year, water systems are required through the Safe Drinking Water Act to send out a consumer confidence report. That consumer confidence report lists everything that we detect in the water. PFAS will be added to that. EPA is not requiring that PFAS be added to that until 3 years from now. In addition to that, we issue public notifications if there ever is a violation of any of the Safe Drinking Water Act standards. It's required that the public water system issue a separate notification about that violation, other than the consumer confidence report. Those violations in this rule, EPA has stated that for this rule, they're not required to start to be issued 5 years from now. You're probably saying to yourself, that's a long time. We agree with you, okay? And so the Department of Health intends to plan to take a more proactive approach on sending out some of these notices and taking some of these actions. And we actually already have done that with some of the public information stuff, which I'll go over more here in a second. So, and then part of the take action part is if a water system does get a violation, they have to agree to a compliance plan. They have to set up a timeline and show the actions they're going to take, treatment, installation, what they're going to do to actually come back into compliance and reduce the exposure of the contaminant. So our state's been really proactive on testing for PFAS. We've actually have a long history of doing this in some parts of the state, in the East Metro especially. And so we've been testing for PFAS already. We didn't wait for the EPA to put out this regulation. We started testing for it, and we started testing statewide for it pretty recently. So, and that statewide testing, we're through and have covered about over 95% of community public water systems. That accounts for over 99% of the population that's served by those water systems. So we've already done, as I said before, we've already done this testing, and that's part of why we're able to be here tonight to talk to you about it instead of 3 years from now. That testing has advanced significantly. So when we started out in the early 2000s, testing methods had a lot higher detection limits. We weren't able to see as low of contaminant levels that we can see now. And so in the past, it was less sensitive testing. We're much more advanced in the testing methods that we have available and that our public health lab has implemented recently. So our public health lab in St. Paul does this testing. They're able to see contaminant levels below 2 parts per trillion, and in more recent testing that's been able to be done within the last couple of years. So for the city of Hastings, we started testing PFAS in 2007. As testing methods advanced, we did start detecting PFOA in one of the city's wells in about 2011 and showed some consistent detections after that. We're sampling the water system quarterly, so 4 samples a year, and that's to get an average of results. We don't just base decisions on one sample. We don't base violations or advisories on one sample. We have to make sure we have consistent results that we're looking at that show that the contaminant is actually there and it's there consistently. So the big note to take here is that the City of Hastings water and contaminant levels for PFAS met our guidance up until now, up until this year. It's not that the water's changed, it's that the guidance changed. It's that our understanding of these contaminants has changed, and what we know about the health effects and how they affect people. And so now we're communicating that new information. Here's a chart of the city's of Hastings wells and the results. This is for PFOA and PFOS. The blue bars are PFOA. The green bars are PFOS. And the red line across is that 4 part per trillion maximum contaminant level for each of those contaminants. So you can see PFOS has only shown up in a couple of the wells. One of the wells is slightly over that maximum contaminant level. But for PFOA, there's actually only one of the city wells that's under it. And it's not under by much, so that could change in the future, obviously. So this is just a good way to display that the city's water system is pretty significantly affected by this new regulation. So one of the things that we've done with our testing and the results, we've been doing this testing, and we want to make sure that those results are publicly available. And so starting in 2002, when we started doing the statewide testing throughout the state that we've been doing, we created a dashboard online that you can go on and you can search on a map and click on your city, and you can click on Hastings, and you can pull up what detections there have been of PFAS, and how that compares to these standards in these MCLs. And EPA's MCLs, we've just updated this dashboard to include that information. So it will show which water systems exceed those MCLs, which exceed our past guidance. We also, as I said, we put this out in 2002. So we also wanted to do this to show the status of the testing as we were doing the testing, so that as we were getting results and those results became available, they were available on this dashboard. So it showed the status of that. So there's some options available to water systems on what they can do. Some water systems have been able to shut down a well or two out of their number of wells that they have in the city. Hastings doesn't really have that option, but there have been some other water systems that we've worked with in the state where they have been able to do that to reduce exposure to these chemicals. We also work with water systems that blend water together to reduce the contaminant level. Again, not really an option here. So Hastings, in their feasibility study, they put out an engineering study last year that looked at treatment options. And so that's really what the focus is for the city is treatment. Those treatment options in that study identified particularly ion exchange and granular activated carbon. Granular activated carbon is what we've used most. It's what was in those filters on that picture in the Woodbury plant that I showed you. It's also in a lot of your home filters, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. One of the questions we always get, and I always get from people about this issue is, what can I do now at my house? How can I reduce my own exposure? Now we know that we have this issue. What can I do in my home? So there are options for home treatment. One of the options is, like I said, granular activated carbon filters. There's types of filters that attach to your faucet or screw onto your faucet. We've actually tested some of those ourselves. They work really well, the ones that we've tested. So that's a good option for something rather than treating the whole house if you want to just treat the water where you drink it. Another option is reverse osmosis. There's, like in the picture here, there's units that you can install like under your sink. They're a little more expensive than these carbon filters that just go on your faucet. But they also do a good job of removing these contaminants, and there's been testing to verify that. There's a couple things I always say and point out to people if you're looking at home treatment. First of all, the National Sanitation Foundation, or NSF, certifies these treatment products. So that certification is done through this NSF 53, or for reverse osmosis, it's NSF 58. They do testing on these products to make sure they're safe, to make sure they work. And also there are PFOA and PFOS reduction claims that they test for the contaminant to make sure it actually removes that contaminant. They do that for many other contaminants, but they do that for PFOS and PFOA. So you can look on the packaging or on the material whether or not they make those claims on that. There's also, you can go online to nsf.org and you can look up products that meet these certifications, and so that's another way to find a product. Another thing I remind everybody about when it comes to home treatment is maintenance. It's extremely important that if you install a home treatment system, that it's well maintained. First of all, if you don't maintain it, you don't replace the filters, it's not going to work anymore, and you're not going to be removing any of these contaminants anymore. Secondly, if you install a treatment system and you leave it there, it's a really good environment for bacteria growth. So you may end up with an acute illness issue where there's bacteria, harmful bacteria, growing on your filter because it wasn't replaced, and end up getting sick from it. And so you want to make sure that if you have a home treatment system, that you're maintaining it and replacing the filters according to the manufacturer. So we do have a website page dedicated to specifically to PFAS home treatment. If you Google search online for MDH PFAS home treatment, it's the first thing that comes up. It's got a ton of information in addition to what I've just told you about PFAS home treatment, about options available. And so I'd encourage you to go to that website if you want more information about that.
Oh boy, I broke it. Welcome, thank you everyone. All right. No, it doesn't. I don't see it. All right, let's try that. Sorry about that. Thank you, everyone. We're here to help talk about the MPCA's, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's role in this. I'm Kirk Adelka. I'm an assistant commissioner with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and I have my colleague here, Andrea, and she'll introduce herself in a little bit. And we're going to go more into detail of how we take the information from the Department of Health, and we have our partnership together, and then hand off and do work collected beyond what they do and build off it. As you can see, technology is not my best skill here. Well, I'll start off a little bit here. So we'll talk a little bit about our overall program for remediation and how we investigate contamination, talking about our site assessment program, and really the steps that we go through that process to determine what may be the source of the pollution so that we can see if we can address it and clean it up, and then also mitigate the impacts that are being felt to the environment and to human health. And so we'll go through that process that we take from looking at when it comes from a drinking water source, where we may have information handed off by the Department of Health from one of the cities or private wells that are exceeding the number, and then how we move through that process. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about next steps, which will include about the activities by the state moving forward on how to find resources to help many communities that are dealing with the PFAS issue that was mentioned. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague.
All right. Oop. I'll just leave it that. I'll just hold it. All right. Thank you. My name is Andrea Dahlmeyer, and I am the supervisor of the East Metro Unit at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And I'll just hop right in here after Kirk's intro. So with site assessment, it's an established process that we have in our program, and it's just for situations like this that Hastings is in, where we found contamination, and now we need to understand where it's coming from. And so the first part of the process is to determine what the potential PFAS sources are and potential uses around the area. Then we'll want to understand potential impacts that are to nearby drinking water wells, which we know very well here in Hastings. And then we want to determine if there's potential responsible party that would exist to be liable for additional investigation, for cleanup, and then for providing that treatment. So one of our first steps in that site assessment process is to understand where the drinking water is coming from. So with Hastings, we've got 6 municipal wells, and they all pull from the underground aquifer, from the Jordan Aquifer to be specific. So that's where it gets most of its drinking water. That's kind of within the blue outlined area. And then this orange area just shows how far out water can be that eventually makes it towards the drinking water wells in Hastings. So that's the second part that's really important to understand, is the flow direction of this groundwater. So groundwater generally flows from high to low. So in this case, the higher elevation is in the southwest part of Hastings, and the lower elevation is in the northeast towards the Mississippi River. So the groundwater flow direction is going towards the river there. And this is just zooming in a little bit more into the Hastings area. There's a lot more colored lines on here. So the purple outline around a lot of the Hastings wells there is showing that groundwater within that area could travel towards the wells in about a 10-year time frame. Those green circles that are closer to the wells, the groundwater in those areas would possibly get to the wells within about a 1-year time frame. So this is just to give folks an idea of the flow of the groundwater and how long it might take to get there. But this also helps illustrate that this is some of the areas that we need to look at potential sources for, being that this is the direction of the groundwater flow. So we focus some of our efforts at actually looking at sources within this Hastings area. So with site assessment, it's a multi-pronged, phased approach. So the efforts that we've done so far to study this is investigation efforts. So we did a desktop analysis that's also known as a phase 1 environmental site assessment. Then we've also done some sample collection where we collected some groundwater and surface water, and we're currently doing some drilling, installing new wells at a few locations that were brought up during the desktop evaluation. I'll touch on that in the next slide. And then we also have an existing Superfund site in Hastings called the Pine Street Dump. That's kind of in the southwest portion, and it's up gradient of those of the Hastings wells, so it's further to the southwest. And then we've also gotten in touch with 3M, and we required them to conduct an evaluation of the potential connection between their Cottage Grove facility that's located northwest of Hastings, what that potential connection might be between them and the contamination that is in Hastings wells. So a little more detail on the desktop evaluation. It was included so that we could research and better understand known and potential sources that may have contributed to the contamination in the wells. So as you can see here, it's pretty busy, but there's a lot of circles up there. We've identified about 54 different sites that are potentially sources of PFAS, and that's all based on the current and historical industry that was actually used there. So we took a look at industry in the areas that might be using PFAS as a part of their process. We also gave them a hierarchy of high, medium, and low potential for PFAS, and that again is just dependent on the actual type of industry that it is. So one important thing to note is you can see how there's a lot of these dots all throughout and amongst the Hastings wells. So there could be multiple sources that are impacting Hastings wells. And in addition, there could be different sources that impact each of the Hastings wells. So they all might have somewhat different mixtures between the different wells. So a little more detail on the drilling that we've done. We are drilling at two different sites that are in the high priority list that we found from the phase 1 or from the desktop assessment. And that's at the former Curtis Electronics. That's kind of in the southeastern portion there. And then the Oak Ridge Manor Apartments, those are kind of more in the western portion. And that site was chosen because there was a large fire there in the late 80s that may have used a FFF, basically a fire extinguisher that had PFAS in it. Could have been used to put that out. So we're drilling at those sites now. We're gonna get those results later this summer. We've also collected samples from some surface water, so the Mississippi River and the Vermilion River, and then also sampled Hastings wells for a couple of additional analytes beyond what Department of Health would normally sample for. And then we're also taking a look at a large amount of data that was presented in a report last year that's from the Mississippi River. So there's a lot of different sources of data that we want to take a look at and pull together. This is a little more information on the Pine Street Dump Superfund site. So this is in the southwestern portion of Hastings. So that was a dump that was operated by the city from the 30s until about 1957, and the records show that there may have been disposal of industrial solvents and some mixed municipal waste there. And those items might have had PFAS in them, which might be the source of some of the PFAS that we see at that site now. So we've done some additional drilling there recently as well to help delineate that PFAS area, or the PFAS plume that's in the area of the dump. And those results are also going to be ready a little later this summer. So we talked about the groundwater flow direction already. So again, that goes from southwest Hastings towards the river to the northeast. So also on the other side of the river, if you look on the north side, we know that the groundwater travels from the northeast to the southwest. So again, all the groundwater on either side of the river is traveling towards the river. We also understand now, based on some new information from the Minnesota Geological Survey, that there are some significant fault lines, so some breaks in the bedrock underground. And this area in particular that Hastings is in has a lot of fractures in the bedrock too. And that's important because that creates the possibility for Mississippi River water that we know has some contamination in it, could go through those pathways. So when the Hastings wells are pumping, they're pulling in that groundwater, and that groundwater could be pulled preferentially through some of these fractured areas. So in light of that, understanding that there is contamination in the Mississippi River, there's a lot of data out there from a report that 3M put out last year. It shows that there is migration of PFAS from their facility into the Mississippi River. And there also appears to be a unique compound that seems to be unique to the Cottage Grove facility itself. And we have detected that in one of Hastings' wells, and that well also is on one of those major fault lines. So we think there could be a connection there. So we've required 3M to look into that and do an evaluation of that. And they started that process. And now we know that they're gonna have to collect more data and do some more evaluation to really dig into that and understand what that connection may be. So what's next for us is we're gonna continue our investigation work. We're gonna be monitoring those monitoring wells that we installed at the 3 different sites, so the Pine Street Dump Superfund site, the former DACO or former Curtis Electronics, and the apartment complex. And then we're gonna do additional drilling and sampling at other potential sources that were identified in that desktop review that we did. We're also gonna evaluate groundwater and surface water interaction and between the wells. It's important for us to understand if there's any water being exchanged between those municipal wells as they're pumping. 3M will continue doing their evaluation and sampling under our oversight, and then we'll continue to bring in additional potential responsible parties into our Superfund program as they're identified. And I'll pass it back over to Kirk.
Thank you, Andrea. Just then, so next question is, why do all this information? And it really goes back to one of the earlier questions that was talked about at the presentation is, so how does this help secure funding to help the city with its drinking water treatment system? And there are really 3 different prongs that the agency and the state are working on collaboratively to see what resources can be brought to this issue. The first is, and why the underlying impacts, or excuse me, the underlying thought of the Superfund program is the polluter pays. So us making that connection back to potential responsible parties and then using our authorities to have them pay for the treatment that is needed at these systems. And so that's where this investigation Andrea's talked about would come in handy to be able to provide that information for us to go after the responsible parties to be able to cover those costs for the capital costs, the construction of drinking water treatment systems on the ongoing operation and maintenance. The second, what was also mentioned earlier, was the natural resources damage settlement with 3M that covers the 4 disposal sites in Washington County. And there are some cities that are specifically named in that, but there's a path in that document too that if a community is impacted and can be drawn back to those 4 disposal sites, that they would also be eligible for. So the investigation, especially looking at the potential contribution of 3M and how it would get, if it were to get to the city of Hastings and as it go back to those 4 sites, those 4 disposal sites, that is another reason and the second path that may open up resources for the city of Hastings. The third option and way that we and our partners at the Department of Health and the Public Facilities Authority are working on is additional resources in general from the state and tapping into federal resources that are being made available. So last year, the MPCA went before the legislature and received $25 million to do investigation at various sites that have been contaminated. And right now there are 18 different communities that are exceeding those new MCLs that was talked about earlier by the Department of Health. And so the agency is using that money to do the investigations, to find responsible parties to take on additional work and cover the costs. But also we made available money to communities to start the prepping and planning and design of providing alternative drinking water systems when they've been negatively impacted. And the City of Hastings has tapped into that resource, $3.2 million, to do the design work that they'll talk about in a little bit to move that forward. In addition, our agencies have partnered to go to the legislature to ask for additional funding. We recognize that $25 million was a down payment. How do we start getting folks designing and plans? And the goal is this legislative session is to work with the legislature to seek more dollars for construction projects. So when those plans and that are done, that communities can move forward, tap into those dollars to provide some assistance to help offset those costs if a potential responsible party is not found. So those are the various activities that MPCA and other state agencies are doing to try to find resources for communities like Hastings that have been impacted by PFAS.
Cody, my technical assistance. It's not even showing my mouse. That's so it worked. All right, you're this city. Now it should go up, and then we should go over here. Why is that fucking working? I don't know why it doesn't want to work. Could it do the same thing? Hit that one. Okay. All right. There it goes. All right, sorry about that. I figured we need a little pause, right? My name is Ryan Stemsky. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Hastings. So I'm here to talk about what are we doing with all the information you just heard. What are we doing as a city at this time, and when did we hear about this, and how are we moving our side of the story forward? So just to talk about Hastings real quick, as you all know, or many of you know if you read our signs across town, we're a population of 23,000 people. That breaks down to over 7,500 water customers for both businesses and residents. To serve those customers, we have over 100 miles of water main. We have the 6 municipal wells that you heard talk about earlier. We have 2 elevated water tanks. We have a 1 ground storage tank. And then we do have a treatment plant in town, but that's for nitrate removal only for a couple wells. It's important to really understand our water system before we can talk about the solutions. We have a truly blended water system. So as you saw in the Department of Health charts, all 6 of our wells have PFAS contamination in them. So what happens is the matrix that calls for water out of those wells as a water operator pulls the water up and it mixes it together from our wells and puts it into our tanks and towers. The tanks and towers then deliver water back to our customers at a regulated pressure. So that's why we truly have a blended system. So I want folks to understand that first. When did we hear about all this? As you heard from Department of Health, we knew testing was going on in the City of Hastings. We were just always below the levels of health guidance. But that all changed when EPA got into the game. In June of 2022 was the first time we heard, or the EPA did release the interim health advisories for PFAS. When we looked at those advisories in 2022, they were all found to be, when we compared them to our wells, 5 of our 6 wells would have been impacted. That was pretty bad. That caught our attention. Then, as we investigated and studied more, we found that the updated science showed that our levels in Hastings may be unsafe for the very first time. So when we thought we were below a contaminant level, June 2022 is when we first had this issue come to light. We were pretty concerned about that as a water provider to our customers, and by September, we had the Department of Health in, and we brought their toxicologists in, and they presented to our city council, and that's when our PFAS story started. So we started to put out information on PFAS, educate our staff, educate our council, ask a ton of questions, get to know partner agencies, and move this ball forward. You heard Department of Health earlier talk about a consumer confidence report. It's not even required to put PFAS in your public water reporting system at this point. But back in 2022, since we knew this emerging contaminant was on the rise and coming, we actually put it in our consumer confidence report as an emerging contaminant. So when we first heard about this, it was out in the reports, and it will continue to be out in our reports as we work through this issue. All of this meant it was a call to action for the city of Hastings. We worked with our city council as the story moves forward from 2022. Right early in 2023, they authorized and paid for a feasibility study to figure out what we were going to do. We reviewed several alternatives in that study, and as you heard Department of Health talk about, diluting wells, not really an option when you have PFAS in all 6 of your wells. Construct deeper wells. We looked at that, but there's contamination in the Mount Simon, the lower aquifers beneath our Jordan Aquifer, not an option. Also, there's a moratorium on drilling into those deeper wells in the state of Minnesota. So that wasn't an option for us. We looked at, kind of tried to brainstorm everything. What if we got water from St. Paul Regional Water Services? Well, that pipe is over 20 miles away. You can imagine the expenses of that. And then we wouldn't be autonomous in our water system, our billing. We wouldn't know all the ins and outs of how we would deliver water. And if there's a break in that pipe, that would keep me up at night. Anyway, that wasn't a feasible, cost-effective solution. So really what we got to pretty quickly in the feasibility report was treatment. We had to develop treatment. We shared this with our colleagues, we shared this with Department of Health, and that became the recommended solution for Hastings to move forward with. So as soon as we knew what we were going to do, funding was the next direction we needed to go into. We went and placed this project on the state's project priority list. So this is something you heard PCA mention with the drinking water revolving fund loans. It's a conduit for state and federal money. So we quickly got our project in the hopper as fast as we could in 2023. We also worked with our legislators to put together a bonding bill in 23. So a bonding bill was authored and put together to the state capitol. As you heard from the PCA too, a grant came out through the PCA for planning and design. We knew we needed to move the feasibility study into design, so we applied for and received $3.2 million to design the entire system. That work was authorized, that grant was authorized in December of 2023. So that's when we began the design work. Fast forward into just recently, EPA drops their rule. It's not just draft levels anymore, but April 10th of 2024, the clock starts for Hastings now to construct and stand up treatment. And that's you saw Department of Health say that's a 5-year rule from the EPA. I don't know where Department of Health will go with their standard, but for right now, we're trying to make sure if funding is available that we can stand up the 3 plants within 5 years. I think I like Lucas's chart better than our table, but really what this story says is, yes, we do have an OA problem, a PFOA problem. We do have some PFOS in our wells, but OA is the driver for us. The EPA limits, the 4 parts per trillion, puts 5 of our 6 wells over the compliance, but we also have to look at the guidance and the epidemiology from our state to protect our most vulnerable population, and that puts 6 of our 6 wells over guidance. And so this is a treatment problem that has to be delivered to all 6 of our wells in Hastings. So what are we going to do about it? In our study, we looked at putting in a decentralized system. So rather than one treatment plant that had kind of a multiple lines going to it, that would really disrupt our city, tear up our roads. It'd be a complex project in our minds. We decided to go with a decentralized system which builds 3 treatment plants in strategic locations across the city and kind of builds into the water system we already have. So that costed out as the most effective and redundant system for Hastings. In there, not only would we add PFAS treatment, but we also have high levels of nitrates. Below guidance right now, but they're elevated level of nitrates. So we would put PFAS removal and nitrate removal in these treatment plants. There would be granular activated carbon, as mentioned earlier, to remove the PFAS, and ion exchange to remove the nitrates. If we found funding now, and we could start the project in 2024, which is where the design will be ready to bid the project out later this summer, it would still take us till at least the end of 2027 to stand up 3 plants. That's just a lot of work, a lot of moving parts, a lot of components to do it right. That's our estimated time frame. So not a lot of time between the 5-year rule and by the time it takes you to implement the solution. Our project also includes an interconnect to the state veterans home. They're on their own private water system currently. They also have elevated, they're above the MCLs in PFAS. So we've worked with them as a partner to deliver them, once we would have treated water, but we would deliver them a connection to their property boundaries so they could have safe, clean drinking water as well. Like I said, this project would be, we plan to have this project be shovel ready yet this summer, and this is a permanent solution for Hastings. It's not a temporary stand up quickly. This is a permanent solution that would address our PFAS problem across the city. So here's a map, just kind of where these plants would go. You can see the yellow dots are the treatment plants. Treatment plant number 1 would go in the industrial park. Treatment plant number 2 in Lions Park. And treatment plant number 3 over on the west side of town would go in Wallen Park. So what's important there is that's city land that we own. A lot of those sites have wells on them already. It adds to that shovel readiness, so we don't have to acquire property. We can just go with our design when funding's available. The blue lines are the lines that would pull raw water from our wells and deliver those to the existing water system. So those are the lines that would connect up to the treatment. All right, zooming in on the design of treatment plant number 1. The important thing in this slide, you see the treatment plant layout there in red. The circles represent the vessels that would hold the GAC or the IX, so the treatment media. What's important here is you'll see off Spiral Boulevard where treatment plant number 1 is located. We have to make room for a semi-truck to get into these plants. These semi-trucks will need to back in for the operation and maintenance of the GAC removal. So the semi-trucks would back in, used up GAC gets pulled out of the vessels, and fresh new GAC gets put in. So that's important of the treatment process because there's voids, pore space open in the granular activated carbon that pulls out all of the PFAS, and there's a lead and a lag vessel. So this is 100% removal of PFAS before it gets delivered back to the system. So when change out is required, which is testing we continue to do continuously with the Department of Health, the old granular activated carbon is pulled out. It's sent out of state to an incineration plant across the country, and it's out of our environment forever. So that was one of the appealing things to the treatment technology. Here's a 3D rendering of those vessels, and there's process piping that brings raw water in and clean water out to the distribution system. You also see a 3D rendering of a truck bay. That's where those semi-trucks back into and access those vessels for operation and maintenance I just described. Here's a real-world view. I think you saw a Department of Health picture as well, but here's a truck bay and the vessels on either side, looking at it in an actual treatment plant. These are fairly tall vessels. From floor to peak is about 35 feet in this photo. Here is a picture of the vet's home. So this is how we would deliver water to the veterans home. If you know where our industrial park water tower is, that's on Vets Park property. We would bring a trunk line through Vets Park strategically, put a reduction valve on because Vets home is a little bit lower in elevation, and we would deliver the water through piping and valving to the property, to the Vets home. Same thing along 21st Street. We would serve them with a redundant line, so both. So we'd have a looping system, and if one line was down, they could still continuously be served. This is all an expensive fix, is what it comes down to. We have engineered this. We know it works. This is a very effective treatment, but it's expensive. It's a $68.9 million total project cost. The operation and maintenance, once these three plants are stood up, is almost approximately $1 million per year. So there's a lot in change out and upkeep of treatment plants. If we were to pay for this without any assistance, it would double our water rates in 2 years, triple those water rates in 4 years, and continue to increase to nearly 250% over the next 10 years. It also, bonding that kind of money at just a local level, talking to our financial advisors, it would put our AA plus rating that we've worked hard to achieve, it would impact that in future, so potentially lower our bond rating, making all of our infrastructure projects more expensive. And that's why you hear us continually talk about we need help. We need outside funding support to address this legacy contamination. Where we sit today, we currently are excluded from the 2018 settlement with 3M. That's where we sit currently. There's a lot of good work going on, try to connect those dots, but we're not in that settlement at the moment. Despite our proximity to 3M Cottage Grove, despite our PFAS levels similar in the East Metro, we're currently not in the settlement. The way we read the 2018 settlement agreement and the conceptual drinking water supply plan for the East Metro, a connection isn't required. But the 2007 consent order, which is once the settlement money is used up for the East Metro, there's a consent order between the state and 3M that if you're over an MCL or a contaminant level, there's additional funds available. To tap into or access those funds, a direct connection is required. So the work that is being done is necessary to try and identify and defend those connections. As you heard a little bit from the PCA, there has been some recent information from the Minnesota Geologic Survey with fault lines and fractures of our complex geology showing some of those potential pathways. Also, some identifiable fingerprinting of one of the disposal sites to one of our wells has also been discovered. So there are some steps heading in that direction, but we're currently not in, and we're excluded from the settlement at this time. That's why our pursuit of additional funding sources hasn't stopped there. We did look at, but decided to opt out of the 3M and DuPont class action lawsuit. You may have heard about that nationally. There's a calculator in which you apply your flows and your contamination rates, and it provides what range of costs you may be eligible for, and our range was $3 to $5 million. So I just told you how expensive our fix is. That really didn't make sense to opt into a settlement, a class action settlement, when it would keep us out of some options that may be available to us in the future. So we decided to keep all options on the table until we found responsible party data and understood our situation. So we opted out of that particular class action lawsuit. But as I stated, we do continue to work closely with the co-trustees, the MPCA, the DNR of the 3M settlement funds, because those are real funds available to the East Metro, and we're looking at that hard, trying to understand the complex hydrogeology of the region, trying to make sure that the proper due diligence is done for other responsible parties, and then really trying to understand those environmental studies that are ongoing with the PCA. We recognize the funding challenges up at the state capitol, so our request, our bonding request in for this session is for phase 1 to get us going. That's a $20.6 million request to build treatment plant number 1 and the connection to the veterans home. We also are working with the governor's office to try and understand if there's any special project appropriations or other funding sources there. We've positioned ourselves on the project priority list. This is for those drinking water revolving fund loans. We've tried to maximize what dollars could be coming to us in the emerging contaminant categories. We've tried to work with the Department of Health to really understand that program and get us near or at the top of that list. And I think we'll be there with the new pointing that's coming out for Hastings. And lastly, on the funding, we're looking federally as well. So we're looking at federal earmarks. We've recently submitted for the federal community project funding, and we're hopeful that, at some point this year, we hear back on all these applications. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to our moderator and make sure we answer questions that are in the room tonight.
Thank you. As said, we certainly want to make sure that we have ample opportunity for people to ask questions. If you could raise a hand, and we've got a couple of runners with microphones, or if you wrote down questions on a note card, they can certainly collect those from you too if you're a little bit shy, and I can read those for you up here. I did have a couple handed to me already, so I can work with those if need be, but really want to encourage the crowd to ask questions. And also, as we're getting that going, if we could get our guest speakers all up here, because they're going to be the ones answering them, not me. Thank you. Ask the experts.
So if we knew about this since 2022, why are we just learning about it now? And it sounds like we actually knew about it since 2011. So from my research, I know that it stays in plants. I grow a bunch of fruit trees. So now these have been building up for years where I could have been using alternate sources for my watering or filtering. That now that it has built up in my trees since I've been growing them. So I guess, yeah, like I said, why are we just learning about this now?
I guess I get to take the first question. The city really learned of the draft EPA limits in late spring, early summer of 2022, around June. And at that point, we started, or shortly thereafter, started putting as much advertising as we could out to our residents. We've had this discussed at multiple public city council meetings, workshops. We dedicated a specific page on the city website. We have included information in quarterly newsletters. So we've tried to put the word out there. just a month ago, as the EPA limits became official and triggered a requirement for notice and opportunities for the public, that's when we sent out the invite, postcards and letters to all of our water customers, postcards to all of our property owners, our residents, saying, you can't have the passive approach anymore. We really need to make sure that you're informed and have this information. Couldn't have this meeting, could have a different meeting, but could not have had this meeting until those numbers were official. There was a question about a shock treatment to water.
They said, okay, we're either gonna do one big shock treatment, or we're gonna do something over the course of how many years? And I was wondering what happened with that. That never happened?
Yeah, that was a test found with E. coli in the water system, completely different from
Okay.
PFAS.
Okay.
And so, like I said, Department of Health handles our testing of hundreds of contaminants and issues. We were the largest, at that time, we were the largest water supplier that wasn't chlorinated.
Okay, that's what that was.
Yep, and so
Okay,
disinfection
totally
is very,
different.
very common, and
Okay.
Department of Health kind of said, okay, we have this issue, it's time.
My
It's
next
time.
question is there's 23,000 people in Hastings. In Hastings, can we get at least protection for now in every home, every resident in Hastings? That ain't too much to ask for, just so we can all have safe drinking water in our homes. Is there something we can do temporarily? Like, can we get somebody to pay for that? Or we just pay for water and get bad water? Okay, good.
Sure.
It's just a suggestion, because I just think if we're residents of Hastings, we deserve clean water. Everybody, not the ones that can afford the filters, the expensive filters for your homes. Just temporarily, we have 5 years of this, we're gonna need some protection now, like in our homes. Is it safe to bathe our kids in? I mean, I know it's drinking water, but it definitely can seep into your skin. And, baby skin or bathing them. I just think we need temporarily relief right now,
I have an answer to that.
Okay, good.
It is, right now, what we know, it is safe to bathe. You can use it for washing clothes, for
Okay,
bathing. That should be okay.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
And maybe just, I don't, your funding question of temporary funding, we don't collect excess revenue for water rates. We run an enterprise fund net zero. So if we raise water rates to provide everybody filters, sure, that'd be a way, but we don't have a pot of money. You know what I'm saying? We don't have a pot of money that, yep, good suggestion. And
I use tap water, which I know I'm probably dying from now, but now I have a Brita filter, and it's like, that's not helping, obviously. I need to get something better at home, but we need to provide that to our residents.
Okay, since I have the mic, I'll go ahead. Are you finished? I would give you this back if you needed it. Testing in between wells, you mentioned it. I don't remember which one of you mentioned it, but how are you going to test in between wells, flow of contamination? You mentioned that all of the wells go into one pipeline, and that's what you fill the system with, and that's what everybody ends up receiving, correct? Is that a correct assessment? Is that what I heard?
Ryan?
well, there's multiple lines across the system. It doesn't go into one pipeline, and it goes into multiple towers, multiple lines, and mixes and blends in the lines and in the tanks and towers, yes.
Okay, so the 6 are independent, kind of, sort of, but not really, is what you're telling me. But the point is the most contaminated wells could be less used and mixed with one that's more contaminated, bringing the numbers down, correct? Is that something I heard you guys saying that you're gonna try to figure that out? To get a blending mix that would be better off?
The system and the volume of water really would require the use of most, if not all, the wells. Even if one was shut off, the overall concentration throughout the system will still be exceeding and well exceeding those maximum contaminant levels. We cannot blend to get below.
But it could be blend to make it lower than some locations are now, correct? Like if you take the highest level contamination well and you throttle it down to a lower volume, and then you feed the system with the lower, you increase the system from the lower ones, you're gonna get a lower overall contamination, right? So this may or may not work because the well that you're not taking from anymore, it might flow over to the other wells eventually over a 10-year period. But while we're waiting for the system to be built, we can go ahead and get a lower level and have less of a risk by trying to figure that out. And one of you already said you're going to do something to that effect. I just wanted to point out the fact that sounded like a good idea to me.
I appreciate that, sir. And it's something we can certainly take a look at if there's some ways that we can take some temporary measures to improve the system while getting a permanent fix. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just gonna stand because I feel like showing off. It says in your own documentation that was handed to me walking in that it is not safe for drinking or cooking. So are you saying we're supposed to buy distilled water from Walmart and use that to boil water to cook?
Don't buy distilled water. You're not supposed to drink distilled water.
I'm just trying to get the point across.
Lucas?
Anybody?
The question was about bottled water.
How do we safely cook? Very simple.
Yeah, so I think the options we gave were more so for home treatment. If you buy water from your grocery store, you want to make sure that it's purified water. So purified water, I think, is what the term is in the documentation. Usually that means that they have to meet certain criteria through to make sure that it's reverse osmosis treated. That's what they're doing at the grocery store to treat the water. It's a reverse osmosis system. So they're purifying the water through that. Boiling does not remove these contaminants. Don't boil it. It actually could concentrate them.
Mm-hmm.
So don't boil your water.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, I'm young and dumb, so what can I say? I have the other question I had, and then I'll give the mic to whoever. I know that this is a problem for people regarding the infants and all that jazz, but could this be causing people who suffer with migraines to actually suffer more because of this contamination?
We have no clue. I haven't seen that in any of the literature yet. We just don't know. And a lot of the problem of why we don't know is because there's not a population that does not have that in their serum, right, in their blood. So usually in epidemiology studies, you try and get a population of people that are not affected, and then they compare them with people that are. And when everybody has, when everyone's affected, it's hard for them to compare. So right now, there's no good data on that. But I mean, we can all, I mean, things like that cross my mind too, is like, oh, the increased incident of this or this, could that be related? But we just don't know right now.
Okay. I only ask because before I moved here in September, my migraines were completely under control, and now they're 10 times worse. So I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, and it's really hard to like draw a line between this stuff right now.
Okay. Thank you.
So is this just a Minnesota problem, or is this a nationwide problem?
It's a nationwide problem.
So-
Yeah, we're actually nationally. There hasn't been a lot of testing done. There is a national testing effort underway right now. It's called the EPA's Unregulated Contaminants Monitoring. That's testing for these PFAS with newer methods that can measure down to this concentration. It's estimated that 6 to 10% of water systems in the nation will exceed these limits.
So the reason I ask is, have other states, cities in this country, or even in the world, solved this problem? I mean, are we learning from other folks, or are we just trying to figure it out ourselves?
So that's a good question. So we are ones that are actually teaching others how to do it. Minnesota is one of the first to name PFAS as a hazardous substance to unlock the Superfund authorities to move forward on it. We've advocated to the federal government for more dollars and resources to come to communities because, as mentioned, there's a lot of communities that are having this impact. And the Department of Health's lab is one of the first to be able to measure PFAS and really be able to measure it down to this low level and have these standards. So it is something we are looking at and trying to learn from others. We have various networks with other Great Lakes states and that, but it is something that many states are learning from us. And because it is a national problem, we are asking for our federal government for assistance too, so we don't have to do it alone.
And what about Europe, like the Northern European countries, like maybe Sweden, Norway? They're pretty innovative. Have we reached out to them?
So a lot of our work in that area is similar, is on the prevention. So there's 3 ways to handle pollution. You can prevent it, you can manage it, and clean it up. But unfortunately here we're talking about the cleanup after the fact. What Europe is looking to do is prevent it from getting into the system to start with, and they're having some preliminary laws in that way. Actually here in Minnesota, we're further there because of Amara's law that was passed last legislative session by the leadership of the senator and others, is now banning the use of PFAS in certain products in 2025 and then again in 2032, another piece. Because we have to start getting it out of the system, otherwise we're always going to be playing catch up. So we are working with other entities looking to see what they're doing, but there are a number of states that are trying to take some of those actions now.
Thank you for your time tonight to all participants here. From a forensic point of view, is there like a marker that these PFAS have that will find whoever created the PFAS?
Was that on here? Yeah, there's one way that we know of that we can tell to some degree who actually manufactured it, and it gets really detailed really fast, but it will reflect on how the structure actually looks. So if there's a branched version versus just a straight line version, it's very simplistic, oversimplified probably. But if we compare those two, one of them tends to come from one type of manufacturing process, and the other tends to come from other types that folks process. So it's a little bit of a fingerprinting, but not like a smoking gun situation.
I have a question regarding the first phase, which looks like it goes out to the veterans' home, if I'm correct. Is the state going to help pay for that? Shouldn't they be helping with that?
At this point, the state has not committed any dollars there.
They should. My other, the other one's just basically informational, but we have a Hydro-V filter that is easily installed under your sink. It's not as large as a reverse osmosis. And it was first presented and accepted on Shark Tank, supposedly to remove these PFAS. And these filters are developed for your particular area. They're replacement filters probably every 6 months. The original filter runs under $200, so that may be an alternative for these people who are looking for something. I should go online and see how that was rated with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency or the Health Department. Is anyone there familiar with it? HydroVive.
Lucas, I think you're probably the best to respond to that one. I'd suggest the NSF ANC 53 rating is the key piece to look at on the filtration.
The important thing is what technology it uses.
It's a
if
carbon filter.
I'm sorry, what's that?
It's a carbon filter.
If it's a granular activated carbon filter, it should be doing a pretty good job of removing PFAS, yes. So I'm not familiar with the particular one. There's a lot of them. But yeah, that's what the cities use to treat their water, so.
Okay.
For people that are using these filters, though, should they be getting rid of them in a certain way when they're disposing of them?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
When people put the filters that's taking out the PFAS, should they be disposing of them in a different way? You said you're taking ours to an incinerator out of state. What if we throw ours in the trash? It's going to the next landfill.
So the question was about how to dispose of those home filters. If you have a larger system that is being changed out by others, for instance, there's a water company that's taking care of that, that would be a good question to ask of how they're disposing of it. As mentioned, the ones that the state uses, or in terms of what municipalities use, they use with a contractor that's taking it to various options to handle the media. The smaller, under the faucet type ones, those types of pieces, if you have them, you could bring to a county household hazardous waste system to properly manage of it, and that's what we would recommend you do that. Those spent cartridges on the smaller ones would be brought to that location.
Up front.
Thank you. Thank you for holding this meeting. I actually live in St. Paul, and if you think you got a problem, you should see what we've got. Unfortunately, we have a real problem with this PFAS, and a lot of it has to do with 3M being located here. We have 2 Superfund sites up on the river, just up the river from you, where your water is coming from. And it's impacting both the aquifer and the river water. Because one of the things is PFAS can travel through the ground very easily. So, and one of the things where you may think that the river and stuff is fairly shallow, so you are protected by the rock underneath. Unfortunately, actually back in the ice ages, the rivers were cut through, and they cut through the rock, and they're actually 200 feet deeper than you think they are. And so with the combination of those, it can travel easily into the aquifer, down in the lower aquifers, which go out and affect many communities, and not just us. We happen to actually be fortunate in that the PCA has provided those gigantic filters for our water system. But I would encourage everybody to look at the standards with a grain of salt. Not that they're not helpful and they have dramatically improved, but I think that's why you should look at them with caution. If you take a look at how much they have dropped as to what supposedly is a safe level, it indicates how little we knew, and people who were following it not long ago were saying, hey, we should take a more cautious approach. And now we've gotten to that point, But in the meantime, people who were taken on good faith, the standards were set then, they have been drinking that water and putting on the garden, which they're growing their vegetables in, etc. The other thing I think is really important for everybody to know is it's really wonderful that they put some restrictions on where the PFAS goes as far as into products. But here's a big catch. If you take a look at the HPVs versus the MCLs, the MCLs don't apply for dumping PFAS into your water. You can dump PFAS into your water and there's no requirement. It's only the voluntary requirements. So for example, back in us, but it would be in any of your communities, you can be having dumping of PFAS into the water, which then contaminates your water, the lake you have, the creeks, the aquifers, and there's no standard to prevent that from happening. And we are, again in St. Paul, and the water that then comes down to you, millions of gallons of PFAS contaminated material was dumped into Pig's Eye Lake, which then that water comes through there and comes. So, the point is, it would be important to look at all the sources of the PFAS when you're trying to do your planning, and that there's immediate examples within the metro area of those problems.
Thank you. We do have a lot of hands up, so if we could try to make sure that we keep our questions on point so we can get everybody up here.
I have a question back here. The Department of Health handout that we got states multiple times, as Chris also did, that most of a person's PFAS exposure comes from non-drinking water sources like dust in our homes, dental floss, pizza boxes, candy wrappers, water-resistant clothing, and microwave popcorn bags, to name a few. So my question is, how do the PFAS studies on the health effects on humans factor in these various non-drinking water exposure sources when determining safety levels in water? And along with that, I'm all for healthy, safe drinking water, but is there anything done to stop PFAS from being used in dental floss and food packaging?
Right. So when they did that study, they were looking at people that did not have high PFAS in their water, right? So they were comparing those people with people who did live in areas with detectable PFAS. Well, the people who lived in areas without detectable PFAS in their water had PFAS in their serum. So it wasn't coming from the water, but it was coming from the products in their homes. So that's how they were able to determine that even if you lived in an area without high levels, they still had it in their serum. So that meant it was coming from other exposures. I don't know the specifics, so I don't know at what levels, but the study was looking at people that had PFAS below that 4 parts per trillion. And so they still had it in their serum, which meant it was coming from other sources than their water. I can't remember what the other part of the question was.
Might not be your question to answer, but it sounds like, a very important factor with PFAS exposure to humans is in these other food packaging substances, dental floss even. I had no idea that they were used in these. And do you know if anything is being done to stop PFAS from being used in products like these?
That's where Amara's law fits in. So Minnesota is ahead of other states in the nation. So with that law coming into effect, products cannot be sold in Minnesota with added PFAS in them. So as you can tell, the PFAS probably made a glide easier and that kind of stuff. So I guess I'm waiting for other states to jump on board too. I don't know if California has also done that yet. They seem to be pretty on point. But hopefully manufacturers will take that out of their products.
I can add a couple things to that. So food packaging and PFAS use, intentionally added PFAS, is banned in Minnesota as of this calendar year. And so that was past legislators putting that into law. There are a couple other states that have done the same, where we've now seen manufacturers stop doing that. And the MPCA, as a state agency, is going to continue to do spot checks on packaging and that to make sure that that's being complied with. The other piece, as you mentioned, dental floss. In 2025, on January 1st, 2025, there are 11 categories, including dental floss, where PFAS and the intentionally added in those products will be banned. And then in 2032, all other uses of PFAS in products, unless there is a currently unavoidable use for it. So this is where states have mentioned are taking the lead action to it, and it's because in general, usually these types of chemicals and products policies are set on a federal level, and the federal government hasn't been there in terms of doing this and overall in the nation. So because of legislative leadership, we do have some of those bans in place here in Minnesota to help prevent it from those exposures from consumer products.
Next microphone.
Hello. Real quick, so I live probably about 10 minutes outside of town. I'm on my own private well. Is there a place where I can either test my water, or do I just go under the assumption that my well would also be similar levels to what is happening in town here?
So PFAS testing is very expensive. We're talking $400 to $500 per sample. We do a lot of it at the state. We cover that cost. For areas where there is contamination, PCA has done private well testing in the Washington County area. They're looking to expand that. I will defer to Kirk on any more about private well testing.
Yeah, we do have some limited funding to do it where we have known areas of contamination, and that's part of the investigation that was talked about earlier, is just to kind of get a better sense of where it is in the Hastings area and if it's outside of the Hastings area. So as we further go out, we'll be asking folks to take some samples, and that'll be the process moving forward. In the absence of that, for folks who are interested, there are a number of vendors on the Department of Health website that we send folks to. These are ones that can be used to do those samplings on your own. As mentioned, though, unfortunately, it is more expensive than a normal water sample, but if folks are interested in doing that, when there isn't a known contamination where the agency's already talking to you, there is that option too.
I have a question on the serum levels. Is that a standard test, blood test that you can just ask for? And is there a level, a threshold, or is it just either 98.9% of us have it or we don't? As an oncology RN in Woodbury, these forever chemicals have been here for a long time. I believe I see the impact of it day in and day out. And if there's something from a cutting edge that we can do to help the future of what we've already been exposed to, or those generations coming after us, I think that would be important to know. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say I don't know the specific levels, but if you wanted to get in touch with my team, I can have one of our lead toxicologists answer your question about that.
There is some information on the Minnesota Department of Health website about blood testing, so I would direct you to there. I'm not a toxicologist, so I can't give you the answer, but we have a ton of information about PFAS in general on our website. Blood testing is one of those questions that we often get, and there is information about that on our website. There was also a blood testing study done in the city of Oakdale to test city of Oakdale residents after treatment was installed to show the reduction of blood serum concentrations of PFAS. So there's also information on our website about that.
We understand that PFAS can cause health problems. We understand that there are multiple sources of PFAS. Is there any way that we can get a handle on the relative risk of PFAS in the municipal water system in Hastings? How worried should we be?
I think it's a good question, but I think that's above any knowledge that we know. So I don't even know how to do the math to answer that. Yeah, would any of you guys have any ideas about that?
Chris? Unless Lucas was going to jump in with a great answer.
Again, I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not a toxicologist on Chris's team, so her contact information that she showed you, please call there because we have some really, really great toxicologists that work on this information every day. What we say to that is it's difficult to measure the increase in risk once you go above these guidance standards. We can't really estimate that, so we don't know what the increased risk is. Our health guidance always includes safety factors. There's things that for uncertainties that we don't know. So usually our standards are very overprotective, especially of adults, because our health guidance is targeting the sensitive population, which is a breastfed infant.
Thank you.
I got a question for the charcoal filtering. My understanding that only eliminates some of the PFAS, not all of it. And so what is the percent are you looking to eliminate with your special filtering? Because my research showed that the only way to guarantee to get it totally out is reverse osmosis. And I'd like you to comment.
It depends on how often you're changing the carbon out, for one thing. It also depends on what type of PFAS you're talking about. So there is a type of PFAS called PFBA that's not regulated by the EPA that we do find in the water. It's harder to treat, but it is removed also by carbon. It just requires the carbon to be changed out more often. So you can treat for that. Keep in mind that, as Ryan mentioned, these treatment systems are at the city are set up in a series of filters. It goes through one filter and then the other, and we test in between the first filter, after the first filter. We're looking at that first filter to make sure that we change that first filter out when it needs to be changed out. The second filter is there to make sure that whatever's getting through the first one is also removed. As much as we can detect down to, the PFOA and the PFOS are not detected.
Thank you for the opportunity. One population that I hear that we need to protect are our young people. So has the Hastings School District been in talks with filtering water? Because kids can't leave to get clean water, or or get bottled water. So has the school district been in conversation to make the water safe in Hastings schools?
Ma'am, I do not represent the school district, but will hazard a little bit of a answer to that, since I did happen to speak with Dr. Champa earlier this week. They are talking among their health advisors. I know that she had questions about filtration systems for drinking fountains and water and bottle fillers, so it's certainly something on their mind. Coincidentally, the City Council and School Board have a joint meeting coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm sure that we'll wind up talking about it some more there too.
Thank you.
My question is, where's the county in all this? What commitment does the county have to this? I mean, the drinking water management area encompasses Marchand, Vermilion. The Vermilion River goes all the way back to I-35. And the Vermilion River itself is a contributor to our groundwater. The county's been telling us for the last 15 years that at some point beyond the city of Vermilion, water is lost from the Vermilion into our groundwater. And yet I don't see a county representative here at all talking to us. I don't see Met Council here. They regulate everything else we do. Where is their commitment to this?
I think that's a rhetorical question at this point. Next.
Hi. First off, I'd like to thank all of you for being here. I did have a question you guys had put up there, and it was kind of showing like the flow over a year's period of time versus a 10-year period of time for the Hastings drinking water. So is that from the well itself and where it travels to get to the rest of the residents?
Was your question asking how long it takes to get from the wells to the
Yeah, because you
residents?
had one of the pictures up there, it was the Hastings drinking water sources. The purple was 10 years travel time. The green was 1 year travel time. So that was the Hastings city water, correct?
Yes, that's correct, yep.
And so those chemicals can travel through that 10-year period of time, running in the ground and everything else. So I guess I'm trying to understand, like, even through 2018, these chemicals are still traveling in the water system, haven't hit Hastings yet. So how are we not a part of that 3M thing? That's what, I mean, these things are still traveling south. In the article I have here, we're big fisher people, and you're not even supposed to eat the fish in Wabasha because of the PFAS levels. And I mean, Wabasha's 45 minutes that way. So I mean, how far does this go? You know, so, I mean, other people haven't found out or been hit like that yet. So Minnesota is gonna be getting hit big with all of this, and somebody needs to be accountable for it.
So the question was about the Mississippi River and that, and Minnesota's levels of PFAS in the river and that. You know, I think it's a mixture of both. We do have a manufacturer of PFAS here, so with 3M, we do have more use of PFAS here in its manufacturing, and it's showing up in the environment as a result, because it was disposed of in many places and that. And so that's one piece here too. I think the second piece is something that others have mentioned too, is we know about it because we test for it. Many other states have not tested for it, so they don't know about it. It's there, it's just they're not aware of it. So it may seem like there's more here in Minnesota than other states, or there's more knowledge about it. It's because there is action being taken, and that's a result. So it's a kind of a mix. We are unique in Minnesota because we have a PFAS manufacturer, but also we have, as a result, been doing more and know more. So knowing, for instance, the river is a big issue. One of the things that the agency is going to be doing this year is the whole stretch of the Mississippi River is sample its water quality and the fish for a number of chemicals, including PFAS for the first time. So from the very beginning to the end of the Mississippi, as a result of money from the legislature and the Clean Water Act and the lottery dollars. Excuse me, not the lottery dollars, the legacy dollars and the sales tax.
2006, we did our kitchen, and I took the opportunity to run a 3/8-inch line from the basement to the kitchen and put a carbon filter in the basement to feed the refrigerator, ice maker, and a spigot on the sink. So we've been enjoying our carbon-filled water for all these years. I'm sitting here wondering, how cost-effective would that be? How much would 4,000, I did it myself, so I don't have good labor cost estimates, but you know, how much would it cost to do this to 4,000 kitchens in the city? And then we're good against any threat that comes along, not just these certain things. We have more people down here.
The quick answer to that, sir? By law, because this is a public water system, the city has to treat for the distribution to the city, not something that the city could do in individual homes.
And to add to that, I think to what Lucas was saying at the Department of Health, if maintenance isn't properly done on those lines, bacteria can build up in those filter systems and cause other adverse effects. So,
So, you know, with our work with PFAS and other parts of the state, we have done studies to determine kind of what is the cost effectiveness. And it is more effective for a community like Hastings to address it through the municipal system, as was mentioned there, because of not only the maintenance pieces in that, it is cost savings in general overall also. Yep.
I've got two fairly simple questions about what we can do just temporarily. First of all, if we buy water that is reverse osmosis filtered at the grocery store, but we put it in a plastic bottle, are we defeating the purpose or not? Are we going to get leaching from the plastic bottle? I just don't know.
I would say I don't know either. So we have not tested every plastic bottle that's out there. There's a lot of them. So in general, I would not expect PFAS to be leaching from your typical plastic water bottles, but we just don't, you're right, we don't know.
The other question isn't directly about water, but is about exposure to PFAS. I know Teflon in frying pans and things like that was a significant problem. Are there still PFAS in the ceramic nonstick frying pans, or only in the ones with Teflon?
So there are a number of, a bit of information out there. You'll notice a lot of folks will say maybe it's PFO free or PFOS free instead of PFAS, PFAS. And it's because they've moved to a different chemical within the family. And that's why the larger work being done by many entities, including the state, is to ban the whole class of items. And cookware is one of them that is included in the 2025 ban that is under the, the law, because of concerns of not only the older chemicals that you were talking about with Teflon, but what are the new generations. Unfortunately, our history with PFAS is the more we learn about a PFAS, the more we know of their risk. And so what we're trying to do is not have a regrettable substitution of another PFAS that we only later find is a risk. So that's why the law here in Minnesota in 2025 that cookware would be a ban for the whole class of PFAS.
Sorry, I had a question before too. When they went after 3M, and not saying that they're to blame, but are they to blame? What was done with 3M to stop the leaking of the chemicals?
So there's a number of actions being taken and have been taken and more to come. So a good example is the 4 disposal sites we've talked about. One is located at the Cottage Grove facility, one is in Woodbury, one is in Lake Elmo, and one is Oakdale. Those were excavated to remove what we knew of the largest mass of the PFAS and put in a lined landfill elsewhere to keep it out. We're still doing more work there and have asked 3M to do additional work because of more knowledge and being able to sample it and finding other results that are there. So those are some of the examples of past disposal practices. Another example is actions the agency has taken in terms of working with on their wastewater discharge. In the coming months here, the agency will be updating the water discharge permit that was mentioned earlier to put in more stringent requirements on the company. And as you may know, the company is right now building a state-of-the-art treatment system for its wastewater and stormwater due to the direction of the MPCA. So those are some of the things that we're doing, and we're continuing to look at that facility there in Cottage Grove and their other locations to see if additional things are needing to be done. We're asking them, for instance, to model a whole conceptual site model of everything that's occurring there for us to take a look at it. We've done that historically a while back when PFAS was first found there in the early 2000s. But as we've gotten more information, we're going back and looking again because we know more and we know more types of PFAS. So the work is continuing also.
Okay, and I promise this is my last question, but it's a very important one. So since, the levels have been higher in Hastings and we haven't been really aware of it, and for people that don't have reverse osmosis or whatever, have been pregnant, should they get blood tested? Should their babies be blood tested for this? And then for follow-up, what if something down the road, they end up getting some sort of kidney cancer or something, and then it could be attached to something and get help through a certain law or whatnot? I mean, is that something that the state is looking into as well?
Question. I don't know of any thing put into that the state has in place for testing like that. It's just been studies. I think there was testing and studies around Lake Elmo and people living over there, but I have not heard of anything in this area. This is something you could ask your physician about too, is testing, because I don't know if every physician does that or has a setup to do that. So that would just be a question for your physician, and just see if you could get tested and then just have that on file. That might be something to do.
I'll take the second half of that question about liability of companies and that. So under the state Superfund law, there's many types of liability, and there is one about personal injury. There is that path through the state Superfund program. That is not something the state can do. That would be a private action, and I just advise you to talk to an attorney about that and what those options are.
So my question revolves around the presentation today, which I thought was very well done. I have a more clear understanding of the careful information that you put together for us today. One of the things that I noted is the level of PFAS has increased over time, which leads me to believe it's going to continue to increase. We do have a good 5-year plan. 5 years from now, we're going to have a filtration system for the city. So my question is, leaning on the city itself in these 5 years, you are my only source of information, or only source of water that I am buying for my home. Everybody in this room, there's not one person in this room that can live without water. And it's something we can control. We can control what we're consuming for water. I have been buying bottled water for my home ever since I've lived in Hastings.
But I want to kind of put it on the city of Hastings to create a plan for the citizens of Hastings for this 5 years so that we can protect ourselves. It's something that we have control over, but we need more information. And maybe it's partnering with vendors for filtration systems and getting that information out to the people in Hastings. I think everybody in this room is very concerned about these 5 years. I'm very confident that you're gonna, achieve the filtration system we need, but we have to make it to that place. So what is your plan, or does the city have a short-term plan that they can help us as the citizens? I mean, we're all here, but this is such a small part of the people that live in Hastings. There's some people that don't have an ability to be at this meeting, maybe virtually, maybe they don't have that ability.
Yeah, you heard some of the responses. The city's in a tough spot. Short-term plan, we don't have the funding. You heard Kirk talk about cost effectiveness of what it would cost to put in-home filtration systems and keep those treated, maintained, would be more costly long in that period of time than it would be to have a full system in place. So there's not funding available. And what's frustrating for me is, we talk about the 3M settlement fund, right, that we're trying to get into. I've worked in other communities in this situation, and when you're in the 3M settlement fund, in those situations, bottled water has been provided for those communities. I don't have that situation. I have no resource to provide the residents other than increasing water rates to do something like that. And so we're in a very tough spot. And that's why you hear the call for help to our state and our federal levels to help us with that very short-term solution and what can we provide our residents. So that's where the city's at and the short-term solution.
We try to promote Hastings in our business district, and those businesses are using the water, our restaurants, our coffee shops, our other businesses. It affects the growth of our city. It affects the ability for us to maintain the value of our homes and sell our homes. If people want to move to Hastings, they realize the water is unsafe to drink. So in this 5-year plan, and I would volunteer to be on this committee to kind of help find a way for this 5-year plan to make it safe for all of us to drink water in our home. And I'm not asking that the city funds it, but maybe creates strategic partnerships with vendors that can provide what we need and give that information to the citizens of the city. It could come out in your water bill. Just promoting information to the people, because everybody in this room, we want to make it through the next 5 years.
Just one follow-up. Could somebody from the agency talk a little bit about long-term exposure to this chemical, just to help to the discussion?
So the short-term exposures all have to do with the sensitive population. So fetuses, infants, and then breastfeeding. So that's where the short-term issues rise. The other data is long-term, so that's someone who is exposed for a lifetime, exposed through a lifetime for PFAS. That's where those health effects came in. So all we have for that, again, are the animal studies where animals were exposed for a lifetime, and that's what previously the work was based on. And then all we have right now is epidemiology studies. Well, with the someone's checking. With the epidemiology studies, so those are associations. So those are looking at people who had blood levels of a certain amounts, and then looking at what health effects they had. So we're kind of in an area where we have data, but we need more, right? And the long-term effects, again, are over a lifetime, and that's where I was telling you about the cancer data, and it's murky because it's just based on one study. I think we just don't know chronically in people, you know, what we're dealing with. I mean, we're all kind of, I think we'll know after our lifetime, and the next group comes in and looks to see, you know, over time what happens with people. I mean, and it's a second thing is it's really, really hard to marry life or health effects with PFAS because we're exposed to so much stuff. So PFAS isn't the only chemicals we're exposed to, and so it's really, really hard to say, oh, well, you know, your health effect is because of PFAS because it was in your water. Well, we've been living with PFAS since the 1940s, right? So health effects from the 1940s all on through today, PFAS could definitely be causing some of that, but what stuff are we exposed to that we don't know about right now? You know, we didn't know about PFAS until the 2000s when it became apparent that it was everywhere, and we've been exposed this whole time. So a lot of this stuff is just so hard to go back and say it's because of PFAS. So the best we have are associations with the human studies saying, well, look at these people, they had an increase in this health effect, and it was because of this rise in the level in the serum. But we can't say for certain exactly what the long-term effects are. So it's not a bright line. It's not, this is definitely causing this, this, and this. These are all just associations and saying, oh, look, we saw a rise in this with people who had a rise in this in their serum. So I know it's not a great answer, but it's kind of the best that we have right now.
If I can real quick follow up on that, ma'am. As much as I very much think that the answer about long-term exposure really is extremely and critically important here, I'm very confident in speaking for the City Council that we will look at ways that we can provide additional information.
If we were not able to secure outside funding, what impact will this have on our property values? If I'm a new home buyer and I know that Hastings residents will be paying one of the highest water rates in Minnesota, why would you move here?
Sir, I think that you're spot on. This absolutely can have an impact on property values, on the local business community, a number of pieces. That's exactly why we are looking at doing what we can in order to get funding in order to fix this. We're going to be required to fix it, and we certainly we need outside help for it. I agree. Thank you.
So how optimistic or pessimistic is it looking at getting the funds from the state, federal, or 3M's going to probably take it down to, you know, a court, right, where it's going to be a punch down, drag out fight to get the fundings for it. So realistically, if we get funds, you said now, will be done in 2027, we may not be getting funds now. Or are we going to be getting funds now? Do we have any barometer as to how good this is looking at us getting the funds, or how awful it is, and most likely it could fall on the Hastings citizens? Do we know at all where we're looking at that point?
Sir, today, no. I do believe that we have a very compelling story when we meet with state legislators, and it's been well received. It's a matter of through their political process, we'll learn more. The current session ends, I believe, the 20th. So in the next week or two, hopefully we get some good news. We might not. We also, as buried in those slides, indicated that we're applying for some grant funding that we might know more about in the fall. So it's not going to be an immediate answer. I really am an optimist towards it, but until it's in place, can't give those specific numbers.
Have we met with the state or federal government at all about any of this?
With who, sir?
Have we met with state officials or federal officials about funding these projects at all yet?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I have a question. How confident are you guys that 3M is part of it? I mean, they obviously were going to give us $3 to $5 million, so they're saying they're guilty at some point. Are they not?
The $3 to $5 million, was part of a nationwide class action lawsuit that estimated that we would likely be eligible for $3 to $5 million. So some cities might run the calculator and find that they don't get what the calculator came up with. The problem, or one of the problems with, if we took that $3 to $5 million, if we...
How confident are you that they are responsible and we will get money eventually? Like Woodbury and Lakeland, they were able to give their people water for 4 years. I have relatives that live out that way. Free. Everything was free. They didn't have to cook with this. They didn't have to drink it. They knew money was coming, right? We don't know. I mean, we should know somewhat. Do we have lawyers that are going after this? What is our chances? We should not have to go without water and put in our own whatevers. I just want to know how confident Hastings is about getting money from 3M.
We are seeking money from multiple sources.
That's not what I'm asking, sir. I'm asking, how confident are you about 3M? Because I know what they paid out. I know what they did for the people in Washington County.
The state of Minnesota, let me finish. The state of Minnesota sued 3M and came up with a agreed settlement in 2018 to provide clean and safe drinking water to the East Metro. It does not require a connection to one of the dump sites, as Mr. Kudelka will tell you it does. The state's conceptual drinking water supply plan also does not require a connection. I and our environmental attorney very much believe that 3M, or actually that the city should have access to those 3M settlement dollars. The co-trustees that have authority over that have a different interpretation. And rather than fight that out, at present we are respectfully disagreeing but working with them. All that study trying to look at, can we narrow down, and that has a long-term implication besides just can we get into the settlement. It potentially gets us access to operation and maintenance long-term. It potentially gets us access to the settlement itself. We're working with the PCA to see if we can get that direct connection to meet their expectations.
So are you confident that 3M caused most of this, or no?
I think there's a very logical answer that yes. Okay. But we don't have the proof of a direct connection. That's one of the things that's being investigated.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to know.
Hi, I just want to thank all of you for all the work that you're doing with all of this and on behalf of all of us. I'm Stephanie Tucker. I'm a pediatrician, and I share concerns with everybody in this room, everybody on the stage. And in pediatrics, we really take a proactive approach in prevention. And if there's a concern of an exposure, we want to remove the exposure immediately. We want to help make sure that we eliminate the exposure, and as we're figuring out everything else, if a person's bleeding, we need to stop the bleeding before we're moving on to other things. And I just want to invite, I can appreciate the importance of these chemicals that we're talking about, and I'm so glad that all of you are doing all that you're doing, and that we're looking into all of this, and that we're going to have a long-term plan in place. I want to invite that I believe that this is the very tip of a very big iceberg connected to many chemicals that are produced every year that are not fully we don't have a system in place that's fully protecting us as citizens across the country, that most chemicals are not required to be tested before they're put into products. And I think that we are now starting to see the brunt of it. We are seeing increasing rates of cancer, of autism, of chronic diseases. We're seeing lower life expectancies. I believe that this is one of the underlying root issues underneath all of that that has not yet been given the spotlight that it really needs. And so while we have an immediate issue that needs immediate attention, immediate, short and long term, we're also looking at, the root source of all of this. So part of what I want to invite is how can we all work together with all of you and all of us as a community to raise the bar back up to the very highest standards, because a lot of things have shifted over the last couple of years, including a shift in certain circumstances from the highest standards to survival standards. And so what I want to invite is, there's a study, Body Burden, the Pollution in Newborns, that tested for industrial chemicals not natural to the human body in 10 babies across the country back in 2005, and they found well over 200 chemicals across in each of these 10 babies, most of which were carcinogens, endocrine disruptors, neuroendocrine disruptors. So my interest is in joining together with everybody here in advocating for how do we most quickly get to the point of every baby being born toxin-free and every person in town now and moving forward no longer being exposed, having an alternative safe option. And so I would like to invite, how can we join together in advocacy that everybody has the access to clean, safe water, both immediately, short-term, and long-term. And I'd also love to invite that we expand our testing because Environmental Work Group is an excellent resource. I'd like to recommend that everybody consider taking a look at their website. They have information on filters. They also have consumer product. We also have consumer product recommendations to stay safe. But they have a tap water database, and they found 20 contaminants in our water that's not being reported in our consumer confidence report. So what I'd like to ask is, will the community and will the city council commit to extended testing? So we have the existing testing. We'd like to see those reports. We'd like to, and I'd like to advocate that we also have expanded testing for many of chemicals that are not typically tested for, but that they tested for in this type of research. I feel like we're seeing the tip of the iceberg. So thank you for addressing what you are and the tip of the iceberg. I want to make sure that the plans that we do get put in place address every contaminant, including the nitrates, including any additional industrial chemicals that we might not yet even know are in our water yet.
Thank you, Doctor. Question over here.
I forget your names. Your Pine Street dump site? Check in the junkyards. There was a junkyard parked there back when I was a kid. Secondly, UNM. You got your water's okay, blah, blah, blah. Why is it when I climb in the shower it smells like you're pumping it out of a swimming pool? And third, Trevor was talking about testing the dogs. My neighbor lost 2 Rottweilers, and I'm losing a goddamn pit bull right now, excuse my French, to cancer. And I'm blaming their water. The pit bull, yeah, she's old. The 2 Rotts running 5. Anybody want to answer that?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the suggestion to look in that junkyard that's near the Pine Street dump, and that is part of the analysis. Yeah, yeah. Yep, and that'll be part of the whole area-wide that we're looking at as well. So we're definitely gonna look into other potential sources and do some more testing moving forward.
When you take a shower, if it smells like a pool, that's the chlorine in the water. So the city started chlorinating a few years ago due to the bacteria contamination. So if you're smelling, usually communities that didn't normally have chlorine added to the water, you're used to not having that in the water. When you take a shower, chlorine gases off of the water, so you're gonna smell it. The city is required to test for the chlorine levels daily in their water. They're required to do chlorine testing to make sure that that chlorine level is where it's supposed to be. I'm sorry, what was that? It'd be the same. There's options to do that with home treatment. There's many options available to get chlorine out of the water. Some of the options are the same as getting PFAS out of the water. So activated carbon and reverse osmosis both remove chlorine out of the water in addition to those contaminants.
Yeah, I don't know anything about whether or not PFAS causes cancer in dogs. There's a lot of stuff out there that can cause cancer, so and it's just too hard to to trace it back to just PFAS because, again, we're exposed to so many different things, and many times cancer shows up years, decades after exposure, and I'm sure that's true also in animals in an environment. So it's just too difficult to do that.
Just a comment. Some people wondered about long-term effects of PFAS. I was born in 1944. I lived in Hastings since 1967. I've been drinking Hastings water since 1967. Now, I don't know if I'm an odd duck or not. Many people would say yes, but two ladies sitting next to me have both been here about the same time. And yeah, well, you've been in life longer. I'd like to make a suggestion about two things. One, you shouldn't be concerned about people like me and my age. Not because I'm not important, I feel I am, but because we really should be concerned about the young people. And I'd like to offer a couple of suggestions. One, would there be any way possible that we could offer people to purchase the filtration systems for, Ryan, you say 3 years at the earliest, probably more likely 4 to 5 years. Is there any way that we could allow them or help them get the filtration systems for their faucets and then pay it through a long-term water bill as a possibility? Second possibility, I hear about GoFundMe pages all the time. Could we create a fund in Hastings that would help people pay for the filtration systems? Just a couple suggestions. Third suggestion, everybody who's still interested, why don't you move down here to the front? And then we can ask the questions from down here.
Thank you, sir.
So my last and final question is, you guys said that the levels haven't changed, just the guidelines. How long has our levels been that way?
I think I can answer that for you. Since you couldn't detect it that low, you don't have any idea how long it's been that way. Right?
That's essentially, yes, that's correct. So, like we said, we started testing in 2007. We weren't able to detect it until 2011. So
2011?
2011 is the...
And it was okay then?
I'm sorry, what was that?
The levels were okay in 2011?
At the time, our health guidance was much higher than it is now. So
Okay.
our understanding has changed.
Okay, and then, so it said you guys tested in 2017, and then in 2024? That was 7 years.
Are you referring to the table that was shown
Yeah,
with the nut?
yeah.
That table was showing our guidance and how it's changed over time. That wasn't the testing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so every quarter. Okay, and so how long has the levels been this way?
When we started testing, 2011 is when there was detections of PFOA seen consistently in the wells, yes.
Okay, at this high level?
At these levels we're seeing in the mat now, yeah.
Okay, so we have been drinking this water for how many years now? Is that?
Prior to that, we don't know. Prior to that, we don't know.
Yeah.
I think I know the question she's trying to ask. Let me rephrase it for her. I think she's asking, have the PFA levels been stable the whole time, or have they been increasing?
What we've usually seen is that they're very stable. So these chemicals are termed forever chemicals. They don't break down in the environment by natural environmental process that breaks down chemicals in the soils normally. These chemicals don't. What we usually see is very stable levels. Obviously, the testing levels fluctuate a little bit. That's why we test so often, right? To make sure that we can trend that. But what we usually see is that they're very stable.
So the levels have been this way for a long time. Since 2011, they really haven't gone up. Is that what you're trying to ask?
I don't know the answer to that because we weren't able to test them before that.
Exactly.
We were not able to test them before that.
Yeah. That's what I thought you were trying to say.
Is there somebody or some person that if we were interested in helping out with this or being part of informational meetings, how could we be involved with you? Is there a charge person or a lead person we'd go to?
Sir, let's, you and I make sure we've got contact information afterwards. We don't have an ongoing committee with this, but we can certainly start to at least gather some names and see what might come from it. But let's make sure that I get your contact and I'll give you my card.
Okay, and the doctor and so forth. Thanks. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for the information. Several years ago, when the issue of water in Hastings was explained to the residents, I was part of that discussion. And the city, we were told that the EPA level was okay for us to drink. And at that time, all my 4 children were having issue with the eczema and other issues that took them to doctors, many places, and eventually when we were told by the city council that the EPA level or the chemical in the water was okay to drink, but the issue with my children, just like other people mentioned about dogs, were so severe that I felt that I have to do something about it. And therefore, the city recommended other providers. One of them is Eco Water. And that's where I got my reverse osmosis. And so at least I have to tell the residents here that doing something is better than doing nothing. And at that point, I went with Eco Water and have the reverse osmosis, which completely, or I should say, I can't say completely, but at least the issue, the eczema on my children and myself was improved a lot. To this day, having water softener and reverse osmosis. It's not because I afforded to buy, I still don't afford. But I have to do something for my children. And therefore, for us as a residents to sit and not do something is really not the right thing. But also the city, my question is, back then when Eco Water and others were told to us that we can buy through them, Eco Water is not providing that, replacing cartridges and those filters. So I have to go around and online to find the right cartridges for that. And so how dependable are the recommendations that we just saw earlier for us to continue to get what we need to change and replace the filters? That's the question I have. But it's better for us to do something. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that certainly points out some of the difficulty with home filtration systems and trying to run that through the city. If we've got 7,800 residents, we could wind up seeing not that many, but certainly a number of different models and uses out there, and the importance of the maintenance, it really does fall on the individual property owner or water customer rather than the city able to handle in-home filtration. Thank you.
I wanted to share something about eczema. My sister had it really bad. There's a lot of different reasons that you're going to get eczema. Her eczema was caused by having food allergies, and once she went to a naturopath physician and she started eating certain foods, her eczema disappeared completely. So that's something that you might want to look into. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I used to serve on the USS Tani out of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. It's a submarine, a nuclear submarine. And PSFAs and plasticizers, I think, are probably the same thing. Is that a correct statement? Is PFSAs, or it's a plastic? Is it a plastic? That's what comes from plastic, right? Is that what I hear?
Well, PFAS is in some plastics, but not all plastics, so it really depends on the item.
Okay, but the whole point I'm trying to get is on the submarine, we have plastic tubing to do testing, and before we would insert water from that tubing, we had to flush the tube out to make sure that the plasticizers were removed, because if the plasticizer was put into the primary system, it would get irradiated, and we'd have more contamination and irradiation in spots in the submarine, and that's the way we were able to keep it clean. So when we're talking about having plastic jugs with water, plastic essentially is gonna, if it's in the sun, it will degrade the plastic and put plasticizers in your bottled water. So you don't want to have bottled water left in your car and have the sun on it. And I've read that before. So when you guys get bottled water, if you do, you're going to want to try to find containers that are going to have less of a chance of having plasticizers or PFAS come out of them. That's just something I wanted information to give you.
Other questions, raise your hand if one over here from the online.
From the online questions, most of them have been answered. Just one to clarify. When the image was shown about the number of products in our homes that have PFAS in them, does that mean that the chemicals actually make it into your system through bodily contact or handling things like Post-it notes, or is it only from ingestion?
I think, so certain products, for instance, like the stain-resistant carpeting and upholstery, so stuff like that, when it gets worn, I think you get little pieces, that is aerosolized and breaks off. And so the point there would be like little children, those who crawl and then put their hands in their mouth, so that you have that hand contact to hand to mouth exposure route right there. So I think that's the main exposure route for like children. It's the touching and then the putting in the mouth. So even like sticky notes, I mean, I guess it wouldn't be that big of a deal unless you had someone, you know, putting it in their mouth like that. But other stuff is like breakdown of carpet. You know, it has that smell when you first get it, and then it kind of goes away after a few years, and then your carpet gets worn. So I'm guessing it's the PFAS kind of, you know, gets aerosolized when you're like vacuuming and things like that. So, I mean, as products break down in our house, dust was a big exposure route. So that's just one way. As products break down, it's aerosolized, it becomes dust, and then you either have a child crawling and again putting their hand in their mouth, or you're inhaling it, or things like that.
There's a question is the water safe to drink? Yes, no, right now for adults, just healthy adults. Is it safe to drink? Or would you go out and buy bottled water?
I would say for adults, it's safe to drink. I would say for if you have children, I would go get bottled water, or I would get like a filter. Because it's the short exposures for children you want to be careful of. For adults, it's a lifetime of exposure. So it's something within the next 5 years, I think everyone's okay, because you know, that's not a lifetime, it's 5 years waiting. But for if I had a child in the house, and lived in Hastings, I would kind of err on the side of caution, and I would either get bottled water or I would put a filter on. That's just kind of me, but I think the toxicologists in my group would back me up on that one.
And then one more. No matter how much we clean this up, will we ever get rid of it so that we're just pumping clean water out? In 100 years.
So unfortunately, with any contamination, once a groundwater aquifer is impacted, it is very difficult for it ever to be truly clean again. We will do our best to reduce the sources going into it, and we can try to pump and treat the groundwater. However, there will still be that there. Some contaminants can break down over time in nature, and so that may eventually, over a long periods of time, address some types of contamination. Unfortunately, PFAS and their name forever chemicals, that doesn't happen. So that doesn't happen in the natural environment, in the groundwater. So our best effort is to prevent the problem from getting worse, finding out the source, remove the source, and then making sure that we reduce what we can, when it's going to individuals for drinking or other sources. This is unfortunately not an issue we can clean our way out of.
I got a question here. I don't know if any of the legislators are still here, but you talk about getting help for money to do these projects. I'm just wondering how Hastings got left out of that fund from 3M. I don't want to mention our representative's name, but about 3-4 years ago when he was our representative here, that's about the time when 3M was dishing the money out. He, at one of his townhouse meetings, made a promise, or said he would make sure that Cottage Grove and Hastings, because we were a community next to 3M, would get some of that money. Whatever happened? How come we got left out of it?
I don't have an answer for that, sir. I absolutely agree and believe that we are eligible under that settlement. Why we are not in it is beyond me.
So I can talk about the settlement. It was mentioned the 3M settlement is from a case from the 4 disposal sites in Washington County. So the communities named in that have had the data showing that they are connected to those 4 disposal sites. And so that's why you have a number of communities named in there. The settlement also allows for other paths if that same connection can be made for other communities. And that's the work that Andrea was talking about, the MPCA is trying to do, is finding that same connection that we have for those other communities to open up that pathway to the settlement. However, we want to make sure that we're working on multiple things at the same time. And that's why not only are we looking for other potential responsible parties, but also advocating and trying to seek dollars from the legislature to secure resources for communities. There are other communities outside of the metro and other parts of the metro that are also facing PFAS contamination. So we're looking to find funding sources for all those communities also.
Other microphones out there? I think that's it with the.
So my question is, does the city of Hastings have a place where I can have my water tested to make sure that the PFAS is also going out? Because right now it's a regeneration system, a charcoal that I have going through the whole house.
The city does not test individual water, and actually our broad water system is tested through the Department of Health. The city doesn't directly do that either. I can't speak to whatever your vendor may or may not be promising or able to deliver.
Companies in Hastings here.
Okay.
You can certainly test your water for PFAS. We have on our website, you can search for certified laboratories that do water testing. I would encourage you to make sure that you have the water tested by a certified laboratory that's certified for what you want to test. If someone knocks at your door and says they're going to test your water and they put a little powder in it and it turns brown or something and they say, see, your water's bad, don't trust that. We've actually had a lot of problem with deceptive sales and deceptive testing of water. PFAS, like I said before, it's very expensive to test, and it has to be done at a laboratory. So don't accept anything else. If you want to have your water tested for PFAS, just understand it's very expensive.
Yeah, and I just add, I think you might want to start by reaching out to the manufacturer and seeing if it's NSF approved for those numbers that Lucas had provided previously.
Thank you. With that, I think we're sort of close to wrapping up. Maybe there's time for one or two real quick questions. I'd also recognize that we will be updating the city website with the more common questions that people have been asking so that those answers are out there, as well as making sure we're posting the Department of Health, PCA contact information. There's also a lot of links to their websites where they have information. But any last? The question was about potential contaminants in bottled water or the containers for bottled water. There's a lot in there if I can unpack it real quick and prove to these guys I was listening. One, there was the comment that if it is purified water, it would have been through a reverse osmosis and the water itself should not have contaminants. There also was a comment that, or an answer earlier that, although cannot guarantee, and maybe there's matters if it's in a heated car or something, but most bottles themselves probably would be unlikely to transfer contaminants into the water also. On the landfill piece, there's certainly landfills that leach, but they are intended to be designed to be enclosed so that they don't do that. And I know in some of the other legislative proposals, there's certainly an interest at looking at how PFAS is addressed at landfills and other locations too.
Bottled water is very wasteful in general. I would discourage bottled water because of that reason. That's why I focus more on home treatment and options which are available, or reusable, refillable bottles of water. Not buying bottled water, and bottled water is very wasteful.
Long-term solutions, yes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I think that's about it. But I appreciate people's interest in coming out tonight. Please keep tabs on our website as we update information there on current status as well as things that may develop going forward. Have a good night.